Hello everyone. Tonight we begin with something that Western education often reduces to footnotes. Ancient China. Not the China of kung fu movies or fortune cookies, but the real civilization that invented paper, printing, gunpowder, the compass, and bureaucracy itself. We're talking about a culture that maintained continuous written records for over 3,000 years, created philosophical systems that shaped a quarter of humanity, and built the world's longest wall not as tourist attraction, but as functional border defense. So let's understand what daily life was actually like in ancient China, focusing on the Han and Tang dynasties, when Chinese civilization reached heights of sophistication and power that made it the world's most advanced society. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here, and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. First, we need to understand China's scope and continuity. When we say ancient China, we're covering thousands of years. The Shang dynasty, first historically confirmed Chinese dynasty, began around 1600 BCE. The Han dynasty, which we'll focus on, ruled 206 BCE to 220 CE, contemporary with Rome. The Tang dynasty, another golden age, ruled 618–907 CE. Between and after these were other dynasties: Qin, Song, Ming, Qing, each lasting centuries and governing hundreds of millions of people. Chinese civilization was geographically vast, centered on the Yellow River and Yangtze River valleys, expanding over millennia to control territory from deserts to jungles, from mountains to seas. By Han times, China controlled territory comparable to modern China, with population of perhaps 60 million, making it one of the two great empires of the ancient world, the other being Rome. Let's start with the emperor, because understanding Chinese political structure is essential. The emperor, son of heaven, wasn't just political ruler, but religious figure maintaining cosmic order. Chinese philosophy held that heaven Tian granted the mandate of heaven to virtuous rulers. If the emperor ruled justly, heaven showed approval through good harvests, mild weather, and social harmony. If he ruled unjustly, heaven withdrew its mandate, sending droughts, floods, earthquakes, and rebellions as signs. This created interesting dynamic. The emperor was absolute ruler, yet theoretically bound by heavenly expectations. If natural disasters or rebellions occurred, they were interpreted as heaven's displeasure. Emperors could lose legitimacy, and dynasties could be overthrown by rebels who claimed heaven had transferred the mandate to them. This mandate of heaven concept developed during Zhou dynasty, 1046–256 BCE, justified both imperial authority and rebellion against tyranny. The emperor lived in the Forbidden City. Well, not yet. That's Ming dynasty, but in elaborate palace complexes separated from common people. He was surrounded by thousands of servants, concubines, eunuchs, and officials. His daily life was ritualized, every action prescribed by elaborate court ceremony. He received officials, read reports from provinces, issued edicts, performed religious rituals, and occasionally personally led military campaigns. But most governance was delegated to bureaucracy, the scholar officials who actually ran the empire. This bureaucracy was ancient China's great innovation, one of history's most sophisticated administrative systems. Officials were selected through civil service examinations, testing knowledge of Confucian classics, not through birth or wealth alone. This created meritocracy, at least in theory, where talent could rise regardless of social origins. The examination system, formalized during Han dynasty and perfected under Tang, required years of study. Boys, only boys. Educated families could afford to educate started young, memorizing Confucian texts, the Analects, the Mencius, the 5 classics. These texts taught ethics, governance, history, and poetry. By their teens, they were taking county-level exams. Those who passed could take provincial exams. The tiny percentage passing those could attempt palace examinations in the capital. Success brought enormous rewards: government positions, social prestige, exemption from taxes and corvée labor, and wealth from official salary and opportunities for corruption. But most candidates failed repeatedly, spending decades studying for exams they'd never pass, becoming impoverished scholars tutoring others, or working as low-level clerks. This system had profound effects. It created literate elites sharing common Confucian education and values. It tied intellectuals to state service, discouraging independent thought that might threaten authority. It elevated scholarship over military prowess, making Chinese culture more civilian than militaristic compared to Rome or Japan. And it created social mobility, allowing talented commoners to enter elite, though in practice, wealthy families had advantages in affording education. Let's discuss Confucianism, because it was foundational to Chinese civilization. Confucius, Kong Fuzi, 551–479 BCE, was philosopher who lived during chaotic warring states period. He taught that society required hierarchy and proper relationships, ruler and subject, father and son, husband and wife, older and younger siblings, friend and friend. Each relationship had reciprocal duties. Rulers should govern benevolently. Subjects should obey loyally. Fathers should protect. Sons should be filial. Harmony came from everyone fulfilling their roles properly. Confucius emphasized education, ritual, and moral cultivation. He believed humans could perfect themselves through study, self-discipline, and proper behavior. He taught Zhen, benevolence or humanness, the quality of caring for others. He taught Lai, proper ritual and etiquette governing all social interactions. And he taught filial piety, Shao, absolute obedience and respect toward parents and ancestors. Confucianism wasn't religion in Western sense, though it involved ancestor worship. It was ethical and political philosophy, providing guidelines for governance, family relations, and personal conduct. It became state ideology under Han Emperor Wu, 141–87 BCE, who established Confucian curriculum for civil service exams. From then until 1911, Confucianism dominated Chinese thought, shaping government, education, and social norms. But Confucianism coexisted with other traditions. Daoism, founded by Laozi, possibly 6th century BCE, taught living in harmony with Dao, the way, the natural order underlying reality. Taoists valued simplicity, spontaneity, and non-action. Wu Wei, going with the flow rather than forcing outcomes. Taoism was philosophical and religious, with practices including meditation, alchemy, and seeking immortality. Buddhism arrived in China from India during Han Dynasty, spreading widely by Tang times. Chinese Buddhism developed distinct schools. Pure Land Buddhism promising rebirth in paradise through faith in Amitabha Buddha, Chan Buddhism, later Zen in Japan, emphasizing meditation and sudden enlightenment, and others. Buddhism introduced concepts of karma, reincarnation, and monasticism unfamiliar in native Chinese thought. Most Chinese people practice syncretic combination, Confucian ethics in public life, Taoist practices for health and longevity, and Buddhist rituals for afterlife concerns. They worshipped Confucius, Taoist immortals, and Buddhist bodhisattvas, alongside traditional gods and ancestors. This religious flexibility characterized Chinese culture, contrasting with monotheistic exclusivity in Middle East and Europe. Now let's discuss daily life for ordinary people, because most weren't scholars or officials but farmers. The overwhelming majority, perhaps 90%, lived in villages, working land owned by themselves, landlords, or the state. Life revolved around agricultural cycle, plowing, planting, weeding, harvesting, threshing, storing grain. Rice in the south, wheat and millet in the north were staples. Rice cultivation required enormous labor, preparing paddies, transplanting seedlings, maintaining water levels, weeding, but it was highly productive, supporting dense populations. Northern dryland farming of wheat and millet was less labor-intensive, but also less productive. Farmers lived in simple homes, earth or wood, with thatched roofs, 1 or 2 rooms housing entire families. Furniture was minimal, sleeping platforms, stools, low tables. Cooking was done on earthen stoves, burning wood or dried grass. Light came from oil lamps or candles, expensive, so most activity happened during daylight. Clothing was simple. Men wore trousers and tunics. Women wore long dresses or tunics with skirts. Silk was available but expensive, reserved for wealthy. Most wore hemp or rainy cloth. Shoes were straw sandals or cloth shoes. In winter, additional layers and padded clothes provided warmth. Food was rice or wheat, supplemented with vegetables. Cabbage, bok choy, beans, radishes, onions. Meat was rare luxury. Pork for special occasions. chicken, or duck, occasionally. Fish from rivers or ponds supplemented diet in some regions. Tea, which became ubiquitous beverage, was popularized during Tang Dynasty, initially as medicinal drink, later as social ritual. Soy products were crucial. Tofu, soy sauce, fermented soybeans, all provided protein and flavor. Chinese cuisine developed sophisticated techniques: stir-frying, steaming, braising, fermentation. Regional variations emerged: Sichuan spicy food, Cantonese dim sum, northern dumplings, each reflecting local ingredients and preferences. Family structure was patriarchal and patrilineal. The oldest male was family head, exercising authority over wife, sons, daughters-in-law, and grandchildren. Families lived in compounds housing multiple generations. Privacy was minimal. Family affairs were collective. Women's status was subordinate. A woman owed obedience to father before marriage, husband after marriage, and eldest son if widowed. Confucian texts taught women should be modest, submissive, and focused on domestic duties. Foot binding, barbaric practice breaking girls' feet to make them small, emerged during Tang or Song dynasty, becoming widespread in later periods, as symbol of status and femininity. But women's actual power varied. Peasant women worked fields alongside men, their labor essential. Merchant women managed family businesses. Some elite women were educated, writing poetry or managing households. Empress Wu Zetian, 690 to 705 CE, only woman to officially rule China, demonstrated women could wield power despite ideological restrictions. Marriage was arranged by families, often with matchmakers negotiating terms. Love was irrelevant. Marriage was economic and social alliance between families. Weddings involved elaborate rituals, betrothal gifts, ceremony at bride's family home, procession to groom's home, bowing to ancestors and parents-in-law. The bride left her family permanently, becoming member of husband's family. Divorce was possible, but socially difficult. Men could divorce wives for barrenness, adultery, theft, jealousy, incurable disease, talkativeness, or disobedience to in-laws, the 7 outs. Women could petition for divorce if husband was cruel or abandoned her, but success was rare. Widows were expected not to remarry, maintaining chastity honoring deceased husband. Children were valued, particularly sons who continued family line, performed ancestor worship, and supported parents in old age. Daughters were less valued, seen as temporary family members who'd marry out. Infanticide of daughters occurred, especially during famines or in poor families who couldn't afford dowries. Education for boys began early in literate families. They learned to read and write classical Chinese, memorized Confucian texts, studied history and poetry. Only tiny percentage continued to advance study and examination preparation. Most boys learned father's trade, farming, crafts, or commerce. Cities were centers of administration, commerce, and culture. Chang'an, Tang Dynasty capital, was world's largest city, with perhaps 1 million inhabitants. It had planned layout, wide streets, market districts, temples, palaces, and foreign quarters, where Persian, Arab, and Indian merchants lived. Markets sold everything: food, cloth, tools, jewelry, books, medicine. Guilds organized craftsmen, potters, metal workers, carpenters, each with their own districts. Restaurants, tea houses, brothels, and entertainment venues provided diversions. Acrobats, storytellers, musicians, and puppet shows entertained crowds. Urban life offered opportunities, but also dangers. Crime was common, poverty extreme. The wealthy lived in large compounds with servants and guards. The poor crowded into tenements or lived on streets. Fire was a constant threat in cities of wood and paper. Diseases spread rapidly in crowded conditions. Entertainment varied by class. Elites enjoyed poetry composition, calligraphy, painting, and playing musical instruments like chin, 7-string zither, or pipa, pear-shaped lute. They attended elaborate banquets with multiple courses, wine, and performances by dancers and musicians. Commoners enjoyed simpler pleasures: local festivals, theatrical performances, gambling, drinking, and folk music. Storytellers recited historical tales and romances. Shadow puppet shows entertained children and adults. Sports like polo, introduced from Persia, was popular among elite during Tang Dynasty. Festivals marked agricultural calendar and honored gods and ancestors. Chinese New Year was most important. Families reuniting, houses cleaned, debt settled, and ancestors venerated. Chinese festival honored dead, families visiting graves to offer food and burn paper money. Mid-Autumn Festival celebrated harvest with mooncakes and family gatherings. Ancestor worship was central to Chinese religious life. Families maintained ancestral tablets in home shrines, burning incense and offering food and wine to deceased relatives. Ancestors were believed to influence living descendants' fortunes, requiring regular veneration to maintain their favor and avoid their displeasure. Death rituals were elaborate. Bodies were dressed in finest clothes, placed in coffins, and buried after mourning period. Wealthy were buried with goods for afterlife: food, money, servants represented by figurines, and luxury items. Mourning periods varied by relationship: 3 years for parents, shorter for others. During mourning, descendants wore white, restricted activities, and observed ritual prohibitions. Technology in ancient China was remarkably advanced. Paper was invented during Han Dynasty, around 105 CE, revolutionizing record-keeping and literature. Printing was invented during Tang Dynasty, initially woodblock printing, later movable type under Song Dynasty, centuries before Gutenberg. Gunpowder was discovered during Tang Dynasty by Taoist alchemists seeking immortality elixir. Initially used for fireworks and signals, it later revolutionized warfare. The compass, invented during Han Dynasty for feng shui and navigation, later enabled seafaring exploration. Other innovations included porcelain, creating delicate, beautiful ceramics exported worldwide; silk production, monopolized by China for centuries; advanced iron and steel production, sophisticated water management systems for irrigation and flood control, and mechanical devices like water clocks and seismographs. Chinese medicine developed distinctive theories: qi, vital energy flowing through body; yin and yang, complementary opposites; 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, water, corresponding to organs and imbalances causing illness. Treatments included acupuncture, herbal remedies, diet, and exercise, like Tai Chi or Qigong. Legal system was based on codified laws, harsh punishments, and Confucian morality. Crimes against emperor, parents, or social hierarchy were most serious. Punishments included beatings, mutilation, forced labor, exile, and execution. Torture was legal during interrogation. Justice was swift but not always fair, influenced by social status and corruption. Social hierarchy was theoretically rigid: scholars at top, then farmers producing food, then artisans making goods, finally merchants who merely moved goods around, contributing nothing productive. In reality, merchants could be wealthy and influential, and status was more fluid than ideology suggested. Slavery existed but was less central than in Rome or American South. Slaves were prisoners of war, criminals, or people sold into slavery due to poverty. They performed domestic service, agricultural labor, or government projects. But most labor was done by free peasants, owing taxes and corvée service to the state. As evening comes in our imagined journey through ancient China, you return home from fields or workshop. The setting sun paints the sky orange and red. Smoke rises from cooking fires. You eat simple meal with family, rice and vegetables, perhaps small piece of pork if it's festival day. Children play outside until darkness falls. At night, houses are dark, lit only by expensive oil lamps, if you can afford them. You might tell stories, mend clothes, or prepare for next day's work. Then you sleep on a raised platform or mattress on the floor, covered with quilts if it's cold. Tomorrow brings more of the same work, family duties, and the endless cycle of agricultural seasons. This was daily life in ancient China for most people. Not emperors in palaces or scholars composing poetry, but farmers, artisans, merchants, and their families working hard, maintaining traditions, honoring ancestors, and occasionally enjoying festivals, marriages, and simple pleasures that made life bearable, despite hardship. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine walking through a Tang Dynasty city at dusk. Paper lanterns begin to glow. Street vendors call out final bargains. The smell of stir-fried vegetables and steamed dumplings fills the air. A storyteller gathers a crowd, beginning a tale of ancient heroes. Somewhere, a temple bell rings, marking evening prayers. The city, so vibrant by day, begins to quiet as darkness falls, and families retreat to homes. This was ancient China, a civilization of enormous sophistication and longevity, creating philosophy, technology, art, and systems of governance that shaped not just China but all of East Asia and beyond. It wasn't perfect. It was hierarchical, often cruel, and restricted freedom in ways modern people find intolerable. But it was also stable, orderly, and provided meaning and structure to millions of lives across millennia. Rest peacefully, knowing that ancient China's contributions to civilization are immense and often underappreciated in Western education that focuses on Greece and Rome. Paper, printing, gunpowder, the compass, bureaucracy, civil service exams, sophisticated agriculture, advanced metallurgy, exquisite art, profound philosophy, all came from China. We owe them more than most realize. Sleep well, and let the Great Wall fade into dreams where it still guards borders, where emperors still rule under heaven's mandate, and where the Middle Kingdom still stands as center of the civilized world, beacon of learning, order, and culture that it was for thousands of years. Good night. And more? We've explored daily life in ancient China. Now let's discuss something that defines China in global imagination: the Great Wall and the massive imperial projects that showcase both Chinese engineering genius and the human cost of authoritarian power. But the wall is just one example. Ancient China produced innovations that changed world history: paper, printing, gunpowder, the compass, advanced metallurgy, sophisticated agriculture, and bureaucratic systems that governed hundreds of millions. So let's understand how these achievements were created, why they mattered, and what they reveal about Chinese civilization's capacity for both remarkable creation and systematic exploitation. The Great Wall of China is actually a misleading name. There isn't one wall, but many walls, built over 2,000 years by different dynasties for different purposes. The earliest walls date to the Warring States period, 475–221 BCE, when various Chinese states built defensive barriers against each other and against northern nomadic tribes. These early walls were rammed earth, laboriously built by pounding layers of soil between wooden frames until hardened into solid barriers. When Qin Shi Huang unified China in 221 BCE, establishing the Qin dynasty, he ordered these separate walls connected and extended into a unified defensive system. This is when the Great Wall began taking recognizable form, though what Qin built was very different from the brick and stone wall. Tourists visit today, which dates mostly from Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644 CE. Qin Shi Huang was an extraordinary and terrifying figure. He was first emperor of unified China, ending centuries of warfare by conquering rival states through superior military organization and ruthless tactics. He standardized currency, weights, measures, and even axle width of carts so they'd fit the same ruts in roads, facilitating trade and military logistics. He standardized written Chinese, ensuring communication across regions, speaking different dialects. But he was also a paranoid tyrant who burned books and buried scholars alive to suppress dissent. He forced hundreds of thousands, possibly over 1 million workers, soldiers, and criminals to build his wall, roads, palaces, and his famous tomb with its terracotta army. The human cost was staggering. Workers died from exhaustion, disease, accidents, and sometimes execution if they failed to meet quotas. Bodies were allegedly buried within the wall itself, though this is probably exaggeration. The Qin Wall wasn't a continuous barrier. It followed mountain ridges and natural barriers, connecting fortifications at strategic points. Watchtowers every few miles allowed soldiers to signal with smoke by day or fire by night, warning of approaching enemies. Garrison troops stationed along the wall could respond to threats or alert larger armies to major invasions. But the wall was never fully effective. Nomadic raiders could still penetrate through mountain passes, bribe guards, or simply go around. The wall's real purpose was slowing invasions, buying time for response, and demonstrating state power. It was symbol as much as practical defense, showing subjects and enemies that the emperor commanded resources to undertake massive projects. The Qin dynasty collapsed after Qin Shi Huang's death in 210 BCE. His son was weak, and rebellion erupted, led by peasants, former aristocrats, and generals. The dynasty that had unified China lasted only 15 years, succeeded by Han Dynasty, which ruled for 4 centuries and gave its name to ethnic Chinese, Han people. The Han continued building and maintaining walls, though less obsessively than Qin. They focused more on diplomacy, trade, and military campaigns against Jianyu, nomadic confederation that controlled Mongolian steppes. The Han sent diplomatic missions west, opening Silk Road and establishing tributary relationships with Central Asian states. They also sent armies deep into nomad territory, punitive expeditions designed to weaken Jianyu and secure trade routes. But let's discuss what made these projects possible. Chinese state capacity, the ability to mobilize enormous resources through taxation, conscription, and forced labor. The Chinese state taxed agriculture, taking percentage of harvest, typically 10 to 30%. It also imposed corvée labor, requiring adult males to work on government projects a certain number of days per year, typically 1 month, though longer for major projects. This system generated massive labor and resources. For the Great Wall, the state conscripted hundreds of thousands of workers annually for canal building. Millions labored over decades. The Grand Canal, connecting Yellow River and Yangtze River, was dug during Sui Dynasty, 581–618 CE, requiring extraordinary mobilization. The canal facilitated grain transport from fertile south to political center in north, crucial for feeding armies and bureaucracy. These projects demonstrate Chinese engineering sophistication. Building walls required surveying routes, quarrying or manufacturing materials, transporting them to remote locations, and constructing durable structures. Building canals required understanding hydrology, calculating gradients, constructing locks and dikes, and managing water flow. Chinese engineers became experts in these technologies, accumulated knowledge passing through generations via written manuals and apprenticeship. Material science was crucial. Rammed earth walls had to be built correctly to withstand weather and military assault. Later, brick and stone walls required kilns, quarries, and transportation networks. The Chinese developed specialized bricks for different purposes, some hollow to reduce weight, others fired at high temperatures for strength. Mortar made from glutinous rice mixed with lime created bonds stronger than many modern cements, helping walls survive centuries. But let's also discuss other innovations, because the Great Wall, while iconic, is just one achievement. Paper, invented during Han Dynasty, around 105 CE, revolutionized record-keeping and literature. Before paper, Chinese wrote on bamboo strips tied together into scrolls, heavy and cumbersome, or silk, expensive and reserved for important documents. Paper was made from plant fibers, mulberry bark, hemp, or rags, pulped in water, spread on screens to dry into sheets. The process was cheap, producing material lighter than bamboo, cheaper than silk, and suitable for writing, printing, and artwork. Paper spread along Silk Road to Islamic world, reaching Europe by 12th century, transforming literacy, administration, and knowledge transmission globally. Printing was invented during Tang Dynasty. Initially, woodblock printing, where text was carved into wooden blocks, inked, and pressed onto paper. This allowed mass production of texts, previously copied by hand, one at a time, by scribes. Buddhist texts were printed first, spreading religious teachings widely. Later, Confucian classics, historical works, and literature were printed, making knowledge accessible to broader population. Movable type, invented during Song Dynasty, 1041 CE by Bai Sheng, used individual characters that could be rearranged, allowing efficient printing of different texts. This predated Gutenberg's European movable type by 4 centuries. However, Chinese movable type was less revolutionary than in Europe because Chinese writing uses thousands of characters, making typesetting complex, whereas European alphabets have few letters, making movable type more practical. Gunpowder was discovered during Tang Dynasty by Taoist alchemists, experimenting with saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, seeking elixirs of immortality. Instead, they created explosive mixture. Early uses were fireworks for celebrations and military signals. By Song Dynasty, gunpowder was weaponized, fire arrows, bombs, and later cannons and guns. This transformed warfare globally when knowledge spread to Middle East and Europe via Mongol conquests and trade. The compass, invented during Han Dynasty, was initially lodestone spoon balanced on bronze plate, used for feng shui and divination. By Song Dynasty, it was adapted for navigation, allowing ships to sail beyond sight of land. This enabled Chinese maritime exploration and trade across Indian Ocean centuries before European age of exploration. The compass spread to Islamic and European sailors, becoming essential navigation tool, enabling global voyages. Metallurgy was highly advanced. The Chinese were producing cast iron by 5th century BCE, over 1,000 years before Europe. They developed blast furnaces, achieving temperatures high enough to melt iron, producing liquid metal poured into molds. European iron was wrought iron, heated and hammered, not cast, limiting shapes and quantities. Chinese iron was used for tools, weapons, and structural elements in buildings and bridges. Steel production was sophisticated. The Chinese developed co-fusion process, melting wrought iron and cast iron together to produce steel with intermediate carbon content, strong and flexible. Chinese steel swords were renowned, though later surpassed by Japanese katanas and European blades. But for centuries, Chinese metallurgy was world's most advanced. Agriculture innovations included iron plows, which cultivated soil more efficiently than wooden or bronze plows. Seed drills allowed precise planting in rows, improving yields. Rice cultivation techniques were refined, developing fast ripening varieties, enabling multiple harvests yearly. Terracing hillsides expanded arable land. Irrigation systems, canals, and water wheels distributed water effectively. Chinese agriculture fed enormous population. By Song Dynasty, China's population was around 100 million, largest in the world. This was possible through intensive agriculture, sophisticated techniques, and new crop varieties. Later, introduction of New World crops like corn, potatoes, and sweet potatoes during Ming Dynasty further increased food production, supporting even larger populations. Silk production was Chinese monopoly for millennia. Sericulture, raising silkworms and harvesting silk, was closely guarded secret. According to legend, a Chinese princess smuggled silkworm eggs to Central Asia by hiding them in her headdress, breaking the monopoly. Whether true or not, silk eventually spread, but China remained premier producer. Silk was luxury good, exported along Silk Road to Rome and Byzantium, where it was worth its weight in gold. Porcelain, developed during Tang Dynasty and perfected during Song, was another Chinese specialty. Porcelain is ceramic fired at high temperatures, producing translucent, durable, beautiful material. Chinese porcelain was exported worldwide, so associated with China that in English, fine dishes are called china. The secret of porcelain production took centuries to replicate in Europe. Mathematics and astronomy were advanced. The Chinese used decimal system, negative numbers, and algorithms for solving equations centuries before their development in Europe. They calculated pi accurately, developed calendar accounting for solar and lunar cycles, and recorded astronomical observations including supernovae and comets that modern astronomers still reference. Seismograph was invented during Han Dynasty by Zhang Heng, 132 CE. It was bronze vessel with dragon heads holding balls in their mouths. When earthquake occurred, mechanism inside released a ball from the dragon facing the earthquake's direction, alerting officials to send aid, even if quake wasn't felt in the capital. This was centuries before anything comparable existed elsewhere. Medicine developed distinctive Chinese characteristics. Traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, based on theories of qi, vital energy, yin-yang balance, and 5 elements, used acupuncture, herbal remedies, diet, and exercise. While some TCM practices are medically effective, others are not, and theories don't align with modern biology. But Chinese doctors accumulated practical knowledge about anatomy, surgery, and pharmacology through centuries of practice. Literature flourished. Poetry reached heights during Tang Dynasty, with poets like Led Bai and Du Fu producing works still revered. Novels developed during Ming and Qing dynasties, with classics like Journey to the West, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Water Margin, and Dream of the Red Chamber. Historical writing was continuous from Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, 109 BCE, through countless dynastic histories documenting rulers, events, and institutions. Calligraphy was art form, not just writing but expression of character and cultivation. Brush, ink, paper, and inkstone, the 4 treasures of the study, were essential for scholars. Different styles, regular script, running script, cursive script, each had aesthetics and traditions. Masterpieces of calligraphy were collected, admired, and copied, preserving artistic heritage across dynasties. Painting developed distinctive styles. Landscape painting capturing nature's essence, not realistic representation, but spiritual truth. figure painting depicting people, often illustrating Confucian virtues or Buddhist teachings, and bird and flower painting celebrating natural beauty. Chinese paintings used ink and watercolor on silk or paper, emphasizing brushwork and empty space, contrasting with Western painting's focus on perspective and realism. But all these achievements came with costs. The state mobilization enabling massive projects also enabled oppression. Workers on Great Wall or Grand Canal were often conscripts or prisoners, laboring in harsh conditions with minimal food, shelter, or medical care. Thousands died. Families were separated. Communities were disrupted. Emperors commissioned palaces and tombs on staggering scales. Qin Shi Huang's tomb, still unexcavated but explored via ground-penetrating radar and limited excavations, contains underground palace with rivers of mercury and terracotta army of 8,000 life-size soldiers, horses and chariots guarding him in death. The terracotta army, discovered in 1974, is archaeological marvel, each figure individually crafted with unique features. But creating this required army of craftsmen working for years under harsh conditions. Some were executed after completion to preserve tomb secrets. This was typical monumental projects celebrated for artistry and ambition were built on forced labor and human sacrifice. Censorship and thought control were systematic. Book burning and scholar persecution under Qin Shi Huang were extreme, but censorship continued under later dynasties. Texts challenging imperial authority or Confucian orthodoxy were banned. During Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1911, literary inquisitions targeted works containing anti-Manchu sentiments or heterodox ideas. Scholars were executed, families exterminated, works destroyed. Social mobility through civil service exams was real but limited. The exams were theoretically open to all, but preparation required years of study, affordable only for wealthy families or those receiving patronage. Success rates were tiny. Hundreds of thousands took county exams. Only hundreds passed palace exams. This created vast class of educated but frustrated men, potential source of instability. Women's oppression was systemic. Confucian ideology relegated women to subordinate status. Foot binding physically crippled women, limiting mobility and causing lifelong pain, all to conform to aesthetic ideal of small feet as beautiful and symbol of status, since only families wealthy enough that women didn't need to work could afford to bind daughters' feet. Peasants bore heavy burdens, taxes, corvée labor, rent to landlords, and vulnerability to famines, floods, and banditry. When harvests failed, millions starved. Dynasties rose and fell partly due to peasant rebellions, sparked by economic hardship. The Yellow Turban Rebellion, ending Han Dynasty, the An Lushan Rebellion, devastating Tang, and countless other uprisings, showed limits of state power when pushed beyond endurance. Yet the system persisted for millennia because it worked well enough most of the time. The bureaucracy governed effectively, maintaining order and infrastructure. Agricultural productivity supported large populations. Cultural achievements in art, literature, and philosophy provided meaning and beauty, and the ideology, mandate of heaven and Confucian hierarchy, justified the system to rulers and ruled alike, creating stability even through periodic upheavals. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, consider the Great Wall, not just as tourist attraction, but as monument to human ambition and suffering. It represents Chinese civilization's capacity for enormous collective efforts, mobilizing millions to create enduring works. But it also represents costs, lives lost, labor coerced, and power concentrated in hands of emperors who could command such efforts, but also abuse such power. The innovations, paper, printing, gunpowder, compass, metallurgy, medicine, all enriched human civilization globally. We use their legacy daily without remembering origins. But they emerged from society that was simultaneously creative and oppressive, advanced and traditionalist, capable of great beauty and great cruelty. Ancient China was paradox, stable but stagnant, sophisticated but hierarchical, innovative yet resistant to fundamental change. It preserved culture across millennia, but also suppressed dissent. It created bureaucracy, enabling efficient governance, but also entrenched authority. It valued education, but also conformity to orthodox thought. Rest peacefully, knowing that history is complex, that great civilizations achieve remarkable things while also inflicting terrible harms. and that Chinese contributions to humanity are immense even as we acknowledge the suffering that accompanied them. The Great Wall still stands, millennia after workers died building it. The innovations still influence technology. Though inventors are forgotten, the literature still speaks to us, though writers lived in vanished world. Sleep well, and let the Great Wall fade into dreams, where it still guards frontiers, where watchtowers still burn signals, and where the eternal empire still stands, maintaining order under heaven's mandate, connecting past to present through unbroken thread of culture, stretching across 3,000 years of continuous civilization. Good night. And more, we've explored daily life and China's technological achievements. Now let's discuss what made Chinese civilization truly distinctive, its philosophical traditions, religious syncretism, and cultural golden ages, when poetry, art, and thought reached heights that still define Chinese identity. This isn't just abstract philosophy, but systems of thought that shaped how hundreds of millions of people understood their place in the cosmos, their duties to family and state, and how to live meaningful lives. So let's understand Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, and the Tang and Song dynasties, when these traditions flowered into one of history's most culturally refined civilizations. Let's start with Confucius, because understanding him is essential to understanding China. Kong-Fuzi, Master Kong, lived 551–479 BCE, during the chaotic warring states period, when the Zhou dynasty's authority had collapsed and rival states fought endless wars. Confucius witnessed suffering caused by disorder and believed the solution was restoring proper values, hierarchy, ritual, education, and virtue. Confucius wasn't a religious prophet. He didn't claim divine revelation or found new religion. He was teacher and philosopher who looked backward to an idealized past, the early Zhou dynasty, when he believed society was harmonious because everyone fulfilled their proper roles. His teaching was conservative, emphasizing tradition, order, and gradual moral improvement rather than revolution or radical change. Central to Confucianism was the concept of Ren, often translated as benevolence, humanness, or compassion. Ren meant treating others with kindness and empathy, particularly those beneath you in hierarchy. A ruler with Ren governed benevolently. A father with Ren protected his children. A friend with Ren was loyal and supportive. Ren wasn't weakness, but strength channeled toward others' welfare. Licks, ritual, or propriety was equally important. Licks governed all social interactions: how to greet superiors, conduct ceremonies, dress appropriately, speak respectfully. These weren't empty formalities, but expressions of proper relationships. Performing Li correctly demonstrated respect, cultivation, and social harmony. Confucius believed that if everyone observed proper Li, society would function smoothly without need for coercion. Filial piety, Xiao, was foundational. Children owed absolute obedience and respect to parents, even into adulthood. This extended beyond death. Ancestor worship maintained filial obligations to deceased parents and grandparents. Filial piety was training for loyalty to ruler. Someone who honored parents would honor emperor. This ideology reinforced both family authority and state authority simultaneously. The 5 relationships structured society: ruler and subject, father and son, husband and wife, older and younger siblings, friend and friend. Each relationship had reciprocal duties. Rulers should govern benevolently. Subjects should obey loyally. Fathers should protect. Sons should be filial. Husbands should provide. Wives should submit. Older siblings should guide. Younger should respect. Friends should be mutually supportive. Notice the hierarchy. 4 of 5 relationships are unequal. Only friendship is between equals. Confucianism accepted and reinforced social hierarchy as natural and necessary. But hierarchy came with responsibilities. Superior wasn't free to exploit inferior, but had duty to guide and protect. This paternalistic ideology justified authority while theoretically limiting its abuse. Confucius emphasized education. He believed humans were perfectible through study and moral cultivation. Anyone could become Jonesy, gentleman, or exemplary person through education, self-discipline, and ethical conduct. This was revolutionary for its time, suggesting that virtue came from cultivation, not just birth. Though in practice, only wealthy could afford education, the idea that merit mattered alongside birth influenced Chinese society profoundly. The Analects, collected sayings of Confucius recorded by disciples, became foundational text. It's not systematic philosophy, but collection of aphorisms and conversations illustrating Confucian values. Reading the Analects, you encounter Confucius as pragmatic teacher emphasizing practical ethics over abstract metaphysics. When asked about death and afterlife, Confucius replied, "Not yet understanding life, how can you understand death? Focus on this world, on ethical conduct, on fulfilling duties." Metaphysical speculation was less important. Mencius, 372–289 BCE, developed Confucianism further. He argued human nature was fundamentally good. People possessed innate moral sense, compassion for others' suffering. Evil came from corrupting influences, not innate badness. Therefore, education could develop natural goodness, creating moral individuals who would build moral society. This optimistic view of human nature shaped Chinese thought, contrasting with Christian original sin or legalist belief in human selfishness. Xinzi, 313–238 BCE, disagreed. He argued human nature was selfish and required education and ritual to overcome base instincts. Without cultivation, humans would pursue selfish desires, causing social chaos. Light, ritual, and propriety, and strict education transformed naturally selfish beings into civilized, moral people. Xinzi's pessimistic view influenced legalism, philosophy emphasizing strict laws and harsh punishments to control inherently bad human nature. Legalism was Confucianism's opposite. Legalists believed humans responded only to rewards and punishments, not moral appeals. The state should use law to control behavior, rewarding obedience and punishing transgression severely. Legalism influenced Qin Shi Huang, whose brutal efficiency unified China, but whose dynasty collapsed from its own harshness. Later dynasties officially embraced Confucianism, while secretly employing legalist tactics, creating hybrid governing philosophy. Taoism was Confucianism's philosophical counterpoint, where Confucianism emphasized social duty, ritual, and active engagement with world. Taoism emphasized spontaneity, naturalness, and withdrawal from social artifice. Laozi, possibly 6th century BCE, though his existence is debated, supposedly wrote the Tao Te Tao Te Ching, cryptic text describing Tao as the way, underlying reality. Dado is hard to define, deliberately. The Dado Jiang begins. The Dado that can be told is not the eternal Dado. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Dado is ultimate reality, the natural order, the pattern underlying change. It's not personal God, but impersonal force or process. Understanding Dado means living in harmony with nature's rhythms, not forcing outcomes, but allowing things to unfold naturally. Wu Wei, non-action or effortless action, is central Dadoist concept. Wu Wei doesn't mean doing nothing but acting in harmony with natural flow, without force or struggle. Water exemplifies Wu Wei. It flows around obstacles, takes shape of container, yet eventually wears away stone. Wu Wei is power through yielding, achieving goals without aggressive effort. Taoism celebrated simplicity, civilization's artifice, Confucian rituals, government bureaucracy, all distanced humans from natural state. The ideal was returning to simplicity, living in countryside, minimizing desires, appreciating nature's beauty. Taoist hermits withdrew to mountains, practiced meditation, studied nature, and sought immortality through alchemy and spiritual techniques. Philosophical Taoism influenced Chinese culture profoundly. Landscape painting, capturing nature's essence, poetry celebrating rustic simplicity, gardens designed to recreate natural beauty, all reflected Taoist aesthetics. When Confucian officials retired, they often adopted Taoist lifestyles, painting, writing poetry, and cultivating contemplative practices. But Taoism also became religion, distinct from philosophical Taoism. Religious Taoism developed complex pantheon of deities, immortals, and spirits. Taoist priests performed rituals, exorcisms, and healing ceremonies. Alchemy sought physical immortality through elixirs, breathing exercises, and sexual practices. Religious Taoism absorbed folk beliefs, creating syncretic tradition blending philosophy, religion, and magic. Buddhism arrived in China from India during Han Dynasty, probably 1st century CE, via Silk Road. Initial reception was mixed. Buddhism's concepts, karma, reincarnation, monasticism, were foreign to Chinese thought. Monks renouncing family violated filial piety, Begging seemed shameful. Cremation offended Chinese ancestor worship, requiring intact bodies. But Buddhism adapted. Translators used Taoist terminology to explain Buddhist concepts, making them comprehensible. Mahayana Buddhism, which reached China, emphasized compassion, bodhisattvas who delayed nirvana to help others, and possibility of salvation for all. These ideas resonated with Chinese values, particularly when framed in familiar terms. Buddhism also offered what Confucianism and Taoism didn't: detailed afterlife cosmology, clear path to salvation, and elaborate rituals for dead. Confucianism focused on this life, saying little about death. Taoism sought immortality, but had no clear afterlife doctrine. Buddhism filled this gap with heavens, hells, and rebirth, providing comfort about death that other traditions lacked. By Tang Dynasty, Buddhism had become major force. Monasteries owned vast lands, employed thousands, and wielded economic power. Monks were scholars, artists, and spiritual guides. Buddhist art, sculpture, and architecture transformed Chinese aesthetics. Cave temples like Mogao Caves near Dunhuang contained thousands of Buddhist statues and murals, demonstrating Buddhism's cultural impact. Different Buddhist schools emerged. Pure Land Buddhism promised rebirth in Western paradise through faith in Amitabha Buddha, offering salvation to ordinary people through simple devotion rather than complex meditation or scholarship. This became most popular school, accessible to illiterate masses. Chan Buddhism, known as Zen in Japan, emphasized meditation and sudden enlightenment. Chan rejected scriptures and rituals, teaching that Buddha nature exists in everyone, discoverable through meditation and direct experience. Chan produced distinctive literature, poetry, koans, paradoxical statements designed to break logical thinking and trigger insight. Buddhism's influence peaked during Tang Dynasty, but faced backlash. Confucian scholars criticized Buddhism as foreign, harmful to family values, and economically parasitic. In 845 CE, Emperor Wuzong launched great persecution, closing monasteries, forcing monks to return to secular life, confiscating land and wealth, and destroying statues and texts. Buddhism survived, but never regained Tang-era prominence. The Tang Dynasty, 618–907 CE, was one of China's golden ages. Tang China was cosmopolitan, confident, and culturally vibrant. Chang'an, capital, was world's largest city, over 1 million inhabitants, with foreign quarters housing Persian, Arab, Indian, and Central Asian merchants, diplomats, and missionaries. Silk Road trade flourished, bringing goods, ideas, and religions from across Eurasia. Tang poetry reached unprecedented heights. Dai Bai, 701–762 CE, wrote romantic, fantastical poetry, celebrating wine, friendship, nature, and freedom. His verse was spontaneous, emotional, and sometimes tipsy. He supposedly drowned while drunkenly trying to embrace moon's reflection in water, probably legend, but fitting his persona. Du Fu, 712, Midas, 770 CE, was Lai Bai's contemporary and friend, but his poetry was different, realist, socially conscious, reflecting war's suffering and dynasty's decline. Together, they defined Chinese poetry's apex. Beizhui, 772, Midas 846 CE, wrote accessible poetry addressing social issues, particularly hardships of common people. His poetry was deliberately simple, reportedly testing his poems on elderly, illiterate women to ensure comprehension. This populist approach contrasted with elitist poetry requiring extensive classical education to understand. Tang also excelled in visual arts. Tricolor glazed ceramics, Sankai, depicted horses, camels, and officials in vibrant green, amber, and cream glazes. Buddhist sculpture achieved technical mastery and spiritual expressiveness. Calligraphy, by masters like Yan Zhenqing, 709–785 CE, combined aesthetic beauty with moral character, each brushstroke reflecting artist's cultivation. Music, dance, and theater flourished. Tang Court had Imperial Music Bureau employing hundreds of musicians, dancers, and actors. Foreign music, Persian, Indian, Central Asian, influenced Chinese instruments and styles, creating cosmopolitan culture. Emperor Xuanzong, 712–756 CE, was patron of arts, establishing pear garden, training academy for performers, giving us Chinese term for actors, disciples of pear garden. But Tang dynasty declined after an Elshan rebellion, 755 163 CE. Devastating civil war killing, perhaps 36 million people, 15% of world's population, one of deadliest conflicts in history. The rebellion weakened central authority, and though dynasty survived another 150 years, it never fully recovered. Regional warlords grew powerful, and Tang finally collapsed in 907 CE, followed by 5 dynasties period of fragmentation. Song dynasty, 960–1279 CE, reunified China. Song was different from Tang, less militarily powerful, losing territory to northern nomads, but economically and culturally advanced. Song China was proto-modern, urbanized, commercialized, with sophisticated financial systems, including paper money, credit, and long-distance banking. Neo-Confucianism emerged during Song, revitalizing Confucian thought by incorporating Buddhist and Taoist metaphysics, while maintaining Confucian ethics. Zhu Xi, 1130–1200 CE, was leading Neo-Confucian philosopher. He developed concept of light, principle or pattern underlying reality, distinct from qi, matter energy. Understanding Lai through investigation of things, studying nature and texts, led to moral insight and self-cultivation. Neo-Confucianism became orthodox ideology until 20th century. Song painting achieved refinement unmatched before or since. Landscape painting, particularly literati painting by scholar officials, emphasized subtle ink washes, empty space, and understated beauty. Painters like Fan Quan, Guo Shi, and Mi Fu created works conveying nature's essence and artists' inner state rather than realistic representation. Song ceramics, particularly celadon and porcelain from kilns at Jingdezhen, achieved technical and aesthetic perfection. Delicate forms, subtle glazes, and refined decoration made Song ceramics prized worldwide. Potters experimented with techniques creating distinctive effects, crackle glazes, transmutation glazes changing color and firing, and monochrome glazes of extraordinary purity. Science and technology advanced. Song scholars used critical historical methods, questioning sources and developing sophisticated historiography. Mathematics advanced, with Song mathematicians solving equations, using negative numbers, and developing algorithms. Forensic science emerged. Song Sai's Washing Away of Wrongs, 1247 CE, was world's first forensic science manual, detailing how to investigate deaths and determine causes. But Song dynasty fell to Mongols, Genghis Khan's descendants conquering northern China in 1230s and southern China by 1279, establishing the Yuan dynasty. Mongol rule was traumatic for Chinese, foreign conquest violating mandate of heaven, but Mongols adopted Chinese administrative systems while maintaining Mongol identity, creating hybrid empire. Yuan dynasty, 1271–1368 CE, lasted less than a century. Chinese resentment, Mongol infighting, and natural disasters weakened Mongol rule. Peasant rebellions erupted, and Zhu Yuanzhang, former Buddhist monk turned rebel leader, defeated Mongol forces and established Ming dynasty in 1368, restoring native Chinese rule. Throughout these dynasties, despite wars and conquests, Chinese culture persisted. Philosophical traditions, Confucianism providing ethical framework, Taoism offering spiritual respite, Buddhism adding religious depth, coexisted and interacted. Most Chinese people didn't see these as contradictory, but complementary, using each for different purposes. Confucianism in public life, Taoism for personal cultivation, Buddhism for death rituals, and afterlife concerns. This syncretism, blending different traditions, characterized Chinese religion. People worshipped Confucius, Lazi, and Buddha alongside folk deities, ancestor spirits, and local gods. Temples often housed multiple traditions' icons. Festivals combined elements from different sources. This pluralism, tolerance of diverse beliefs within overarching cultural framework, allowed Chinese civilization to absorb foreign influences while maintaining distinctive identity. The examination system, expanded during Tang and perfected under Song, reinforced cultural unity. Candidates across empire studied same Confucian texts, memorized same poetry, practiced same calligraphy styles. This created shared cultural literacy among elite, facilitating communication across regions and generations. Even defeated scholars maintained identity through cultural practices, painting, calligraphy, poetry, activities proving cultivation, despite lacking official position. Women, though subordinated by Confucian ideology, participated in culture in limited ways. Elite women received education, wrote poetry, and practiced calligraphy. Some became renowned poets. Li Qingzhao, 1084 to 1155 CE, Song Dynasty poet, is considered one of China's greatest, writing with emotional depth about love, loss, and wartime displacement. But female participation was exceptional, and most women remained confined to domestic roles. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, consider how Chinese philosophy and culture created worldview profoundly different from Western traditions. Where Western thought emphasized individual rights and freedom, Chinese thought emphasized social harmony and duty. Where Western religion emphasized personal salvation and relationship with God, Chinese traditions emphasized moral cultivation and harmony with natural order. Neither is inherently superior. They're different responses to universal human questions. How should we live? What is good society? What happens after death? How can we find meaning? Chinese answers, shaped by millennia of thought and experience, created civilization of extraordinary stability, longevity, and cultural richness. The poetry, painting, philosophy, and systems of thought developed during Tang and Song dynasties remain living traditions. Chinese still read Tang poetry, study Neo-Confucian philosophy, practice calligraphy, and celebrate festivals rooted in ancient customs. This continuity, maintaining cultural traditions across centuries despite revolutions and modernization, demonstrates depth of Chinese civilization. Rest peacefully knowing that human cultures are diverse, that different civilizations develop different values and worldviews, and that Chinese contributions to philosophy, art, and literature are profound. Confucianism taught ethics and social responsibility. Daoism taught living in harmony with nature. Buddhism taught compassion and path to liberation from suffering. Together, they created cultural synthesis that shaped not just China, but all of East Asia. Sleep well, and let Tang Dynasty poetry carry you into dreams. Li Bai's verses celebrating moonlit nights and friendship, Du Fu's laments for war's suffering, and Bai Juyi's simple words speaking to common people's lives. Let Song Dynasty paintings of misty mountains and still waters calm your mind. Their empty spaces, inviting contemplation, their subtle beauty demonstrating that less can be more, that restraint is its own form of expression. The golden ages have passed, Tang's cosmopolitan brilliance, and Song's refined culture gone, except in art and memory. But what they created endures: philosophical traditions, guiding lives, artistic standards, defining beauty, and cultural practices connecting modern Chinese to ancestors, separated by millennia, but joined through unbroken tradition of cultivation, learning, and striving for harmony with heaven, earth, and humanity. Good night, and may your dreams be as serene as Song landscape painting, as joyful as Tang poetry, and as profound as teachings of Confucius, Laozi, and Buddha, who shaped civilization that has lasted 3,000 years and shows no signs of disappearing. Rest now. The story continues tomorrow. Sleep in peace. And more. We've explored daily life, technological achievements, and philosophical traditions. Now, as we close this journey through ancient China, let's discuss something that extended Chinese influence far beyond its borders: the Silk Road and the complex web of trade, cultural exchange, and diplomatic relationships that connected China to the world. Then we'll examine how China's long period of dominance gradually eroded, leading to decline and eventual collision with Western imperialism. This is a story spanning 2 millennia, from Han Dynasty expansion westward to the Qing Dynasty's fall in 1911, showing how the world's most advanced civilization became victim of its own success, conservative traditions, and finally, aggressive foreign powers exploiting its weaknesses. So let's understand how China shaped the world, and was in turn shaped by it. The Silk Road wasn't a single road, but a network of trade routes connecting China to Central Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. The name is modern, coined by German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen in 1877. Ancient traders didn't call it the Silk Road. They called it simply the roads or the Western regions. but the name fits because silk was China's most famous export, luxury good worth its weight in gold in Rome and Persia. The Silk Road's origins trace to Han Dynasty expansion during the 2nd century BCE. Emperor Wu, 141–87 BCE, sent envoy Zhang Kaiyan westward in 138 BCE to seek alliance with Yuezhi people against Seknu nomads who threatened Han borders. Zhang Kaiyan was captured by Zhang Nu, held prisoner for 10 years, escaped, reached Yuezhi territory in modern Afghanistan, but found them uninterested in alliance. He returned to China in 126 BCE after 13 years, bringing invaluable knowledge about Central Asian peoples, geography, and trade possibilities. Zhang Qian reported on powerful kingdoms to the west, Fergana with its famed horses, Sogdiana with prosperous cities, Parthia controlling trade routes to Roman Empire, and Bactria with Hellenistic culture inherited from Alexander's conquests. He described grape cultivation, alfalfa, and superior horse breeds that could strengthen Han cavalry. Most importantly, he revealed that western regions were accessible and interested in Chinese goods, particularly silk. Emperor Wu launched military campaigns westward, establishing protectorates in Tarim Basin and opening trade routes. Silk began flowing west, carried by merchants through oasis cities like Kashgar, Samarkand, and Merv. These cities became wealthy middlemen, buying Chinese silk and selling it westward at markup, then purchasing Western goods like horses, jade, glass, and precious metals to sell eastward. Few merchants traveled the entire route. Goods passed through many hands, each taking profit. The Silk Road was actually multiple routes. Northern route through Dzungarian Basin, central route through Tarim Basin, and southern route through Tibet and India. Sea routes also developed, ships sailing from Chinese ports to Southeast Asia, India, Persian Gulf, and eventually East Africa. Maritime trade was safer and often faster than overland caravans crossing deserts and mountains, but both routes functioned simultaneously, creating interconnected global trade network. What did China export? Silk, obviously, but also porcelain, tea, paper, and manufactured goods. Silk production was closely guarded monopoly. Anyone caught smuggling silkworm eggs faced execution. But eventually, probably during 6th century CE, silkworms reached Byzantium, allegedly smuggled by monks hiding eggs in hollow bamboo staffs. Even then, Chinese silk remained premium product, finer quality than competitors. Porcelain, developed during Tang Dynasty and perfected during Song, was another Chinese specialty. The Europeans tried for centuries to replicate Chinese porcelain, failing until 18th century. Chinese porcelain was exported in enormous quantities. Fragments found in archaeological sites, from Japan to East Africa to Europe, testament to its desirability. Tea became important export during Tang and Song dynasties, initially luxury drink, later staple. Tea cultivation required specific climates, giving China and later Japan near monopoly. Tea drinking spread to Central Asia, Middle East, and eventually Europe, where it became social ritual shaping cultures. British afternoon tea, Russian samovar tradition, Moroccan mint tea, all tracing origins to Chinese tea culture. What did China import? Horses from Central Asia, crucial for military. Chinese horses were smaller and weaker than Central Asian breeds. Han and later dynasties paid enormous sums for blood-sweating horses from Fergana, actually superior breeds that sweated red due to parasites but were faster and stronger than native Chinese horses. Precious metals, gold and silver, flowed into China, which used copper and bronze for currency domestically, but accepted precious metals for international trade. Glass from Roman Empire and Persia, techniques for which China initially lacked, was imported luxury. Gems, particularly jade from Khotan in Central Asia, were prized. Spices, frankincense, and myrrh came from Arabia and India. Grapes, alfalfa, pomegranates, walnuts, and other crops were introduced via Silk Road, enriching Chinese agriculture. But the Silk Road transmitted more than goods. Ideas, religions, and technologies traveled these routes. Buddhism reached China via Silk Road, carried by Indian and Central Asian monks. Nestorian Christianity arrived during Tang Dynasty, establishing churches in Chinese cities before later being suppressed. Islam arrived during Tang Dynasty, Muslim merchants settling in coastal cities like Guangzhou and Quanzhou, creating communities that persist today. Artistic styles spread. Hellenistic art influenced Central Asian Buddhist art, which influenced Chinese Buddhist sculpture. Persian and Central Asian motifs appeared in Chinese textiles, metalwork, and ceramics. Chinese techniques influenced Islamic ceramics and textiles. This artistic cross-fertilization created hybrid styles reflecting cultural exchange. Technology spread both directions. Papermaking reached Islamic world by 8th century, allegedly when Chinese papermakers were captured during Battle of Talis in 751 CE and revealed secrets to their Abbasid captors. From Islamic world, paper spread to Europe by 12th century, transforming European literacy and record-keeping. Gunpowder knowledge spread westward during Mongol period. Chinese gunpowder weapons were used in Mongol conquests, knowledge spreading to Islamic and European societies by 13th and 14th centuries, transforming warfare globally. Printing techniques also spread, though European printing developed independently or with only limited influence from Chinese precedents. The compass spread from China to Islamic navigators, then to Europeans, enabling age of exploration. Without compass, European voyages to Americas and circumnavigation of globe would have been much harder, perhaps impossible with medieval technology. Disease also traveled Silk Road. The Black Death, devastating Europe in 14th century, likely originated in Central Asia, possibly in region destabilized by Mongol conquests. Plague bacteria spread along trade routes, reaching Crimea via Italian merchants, then spreading to Mediterranean and Western Europe. The pandemic killed perhaps 1/3 of Europe's population, roughly 25 million people, and devastated Middle East and Central Asia as well. China also experienced plague outbreaks during this period, though details are less documented. The Mongol Empire in 13th century was both disaster and catalyst for the Silk Road. Genghis Khan and his successors conquered China, Central Asia, Persia, and Russia, creating largest land empire in history. Mongol rule was brutal. Millions died in conquests, cities were destroyed, and populations were massacred or enslaved. But Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, once conquests ended, provided unprecedented security for trade. Mongol Khanates maintained roads, protected merchants, and established postal relay systems, enabling fast communication across empire. Merchants could travel from Mediterranean to Pacific under single authority, though in practice, empire fragmented into competing khanates fairly quickly. Marco Polo, Venetian merchant, traveled to China during Mongol Yuan dynasty, spending 17 years in Kublai Khan's service before returning to Venice in 1295. His account, The Travels of Marco Polo, introduced Europeans to China's wealth, sophistication, and exoticism. Though some details were exaggerated or borrowed from other sources, the book inspired European interest in reaching China, motivating later age of exploration. The Yuan dynasty, 1271 to 1368 CE, was Mongol rule over China. Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, completed conquest of Song China in 1279, unifying China under foreign rule for first time. Mongols maintained separate identity, prohibiting intermarriage with Chinese, keeping Mongolian language for court communication, and preserving nomadic culture even while governing sedentary agricultural civilization. But Mongols adopted Chinese administrative systems, employing Chinese officials albeit subordinate to Mongol and Central Asian administrators. They patronized Chinese arts, while also bringing Persian, Islamic, and Central Asian influences. Yuan dynasty was culturally hybrid, court-speaking Mongolian and Chinese, architecture blending styles, and art incorporating foreign motifs. Yuan dynasty's weakness was Mongol inability to fully integrate with Chinese civilization. They remained foreign conquerors, resented by Chinese, who saw them as barbarians violating mandate of heaven. Natural disasters in 1340s to 1350s, Yellow River floods killing millions, combined with plague outbreaks, sparked rebellions. Red Turban Rebellion, mixing peasant uprising with Buddhist millenarian prophecies and anti-Mongol nationalism, eventually drove Mongols from China. Zhu Yuanzhang, peasant who became monk, then rebel leader, defeated rivals and established Ming dynasty in 1368. The Hongwu Emperor, as he became known, expelled Mongols, restored Chinese rule, and emphasized Confucian orthodoxy. Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644, was consciously restorationist, rejecting Mongol period as aberration and returning to Tang Song traditions. Early Ming was expansive and confident. The Yongle Emperor, 1402 to 1424, moved capital from Nanjing to Beijing, constructing Forbidden City, massive palace complex housing emperor and court. He sponsored compilation of Yongle Encyclopedia, attempting to collect all knowledge, and he commissioned Jing He's voyages, most ambitious maritime expeditions in world history before European age of exploration. Zheng He, 1371 to 1433, was Muslim eunuch of Mongol or Central Asian descent, who became admiral commanding Ming treasure fleets between 1405 and 1433. Zheng He led 7 voyages through Southeast Asia, India, Arabian Peninsula, and East Africa. His largest fleet allegedly included 300 ships and 28,000 men, numbers possibly exaggerated but still impressive by any standard. Zheng He's ships. Largest were Bachuan, treasure ships, supposedly over 400 feet long, though modern scholars debate these dimensions as possibly exaggerated or referring to different measurement systems. Even conservative estimates make them larger than any European ships of the period. The fleets were armed and occasionally engaged in combat, but primary purpose was diplomatic, demonstrating Ming power, establishing tributary relationships, and collecting exotic goods like giraffes from Africa, which Chinese mistook for Kailan, mythical creatures symbolizing auspicious rule. But after Yongle Emperor's death, Confucian officials convinced subsequent emperors to abandon maritime expeditions as wasteful and contrary to Confucian values, emphasizing agriculture over commerce. The treasure fleets were disbanded, large ships were destroyed or left to rot, and China turned inward. This decision, retrospectively, was catastrophic. Just as Europeans began age of exploration, China withdrew, missing opportunities to establish colonies, trade networks, and naval dominance that might have prevented later Western imperialism. Why did China abandon exploration? Multiple factors. Confucian ideology was agrarian and anti-commercial, viewing merchants as parasites and foreign trade as unnecessary for self-sufficient Middle Kingdom. The Great Wall, rebuilt extensively during Ming Dynasty, symbolized defensive mentality, protecting Chinese civilization from barbarians rather than expanding outward. Cost was another factor. Treasure fleets were expensive, and Confucian officials argued resources were better spent on agriculture, infrastructure, and defense. This inward turn was choice, not inevitability. China had technological capability to maintain maritime power, but ideological conservatism and bureaucratic opposition prevented it. This pattern, technological capacity constrained by cultural conservatism, recurs in Chinese history, ultimately contributing to decline when faced with aggressive European powers in 19th century. Ming Dynasty also faced persistent problems. Northern borders required constant defense against Mongols, and later Manchus. Japanese pirates, Wokou, raided coastal regions. Internal corruption weakened administration. Emperors became isolated in Forbidden City, surrounded by eunuchs who gained enormous power, sometimes manipulating weak emperors. The Wanli Emperor, 1572 to 1620, reigned 48 years, but largely withdrew from governance after 1580s, refusing to meet officials or handle state business. His withdrawal created political vacuum filled by eunuch factions and competing official cliques. This paralysis left Ming Dynasty unable to address mounting problems, military threats, fiscal crisis, and peasant unrest. By early 17th century, Ming Dynasty was collapsing. Little Ice Age caused crop failures and famines. Epidemics killed millions. Tax collection broke down. Armies went unpaid and mutinied. Peasant rebellions erupted. In 1644, rebel leader Li Zhikang captured Beijing, Chongshen Emperor hanged himself, and Ming Dynasty ended. But Ming loyalists continued resisting, asking Manchu tribes, which had unified under Nurhaci and his son Hong Taiji, for help against rebels. The Manchus agreed, entered China, defeated rebels, but then refused to leave. Instead, they declared themselves New Dynasty, Qing, and spent next 4 decades conquering all of China, establishing second foreign dynasty after Mongol Yuan. The Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1911, was ruled by Manchus, northeastern peoples, related to Jurchens, who had earlier established Jin Dynasty in northern China, 1115 to 1234. Manchus were minority, perhaps 2% of population, governing 98% Han Chinese majority. This created perpetual tension, Manchus maintaining separate identity through bannerman system, military administrative organization, dividing Manchus into colored banners, and prohibiting intermarriage with Chinese. Manchus also imposed hairstyle, Q, forcing Chinese men to shave front of head and braid remaining hair in long pigtail, symbolizing submission. Resistance to Q was brutally suppressed. Keep your hair, lose your head. Keep your head, lose your hair, was saying capturing forced choice. The Q became symbol of Manchu domination, and cutting it became revolutionary act. But Manchus also adapted to Chinese culture. They adopted Confucian governance, continued civil service examinations, patronized Chinese arts and learning, and presented themselves as legitimate inheritors of mandate of heaven. They were successful Sinicizers, becoming increasingly Chinese while maintaining Manchu identity. Early Qing was powerful. The Kangxi Emperor, 1661 to 1722, was capable ruler who consolidated Qing control, crushed rebellions, expanded territory into Taiwan, Tibet, and Outer Mongolia, and patronized learning, commissioning dictionaries and encyclopedias. The Qianlong Emperor, 1735 to 1796, presided over Qing dynasty's height, expanded empire to largest territorial extent, and considered himself patron of arts and universal monarch. But Qing dynasty's success was built on foundations that couldn't last. Population exploded from perhaps 150 million in 1700 to over 400 million by 1850. Due to peace, new crops like corn and sweet potatoes from Americas, and agricultural improvements. But arable land didn't increase proportionally. Population pressure created poverty, landlessness, and social instability. Confucian examination system became bottleneck. Millions studied for exams, only thousands passed. This created vast pool of educated but frustrated men, unable to find government positions or appropriate employment. Many became tutors, scribes, or local troublemakers. Some led rebellions, using education and organizational skills to mobilize peasants. Corruption was endemic. Officials expected to support themselves through fees and gifts, essentially legalized bribery. Merchants paid officials for protection and licenses. Peasants paid extra fees beyond official taxes. This system enriched officials, but impoverished population and delegitimized government. The Qing dynasty's isolationism and self-satisfaction prevented needed reforms. China saw itself as Middle Kingdom, center of civilization, superior to all barbarians. Foreign trade was restricted to single port, Guangzhou, Canton, and conducted through monopolistic guild system. Europeans were restricted to small area outside city walls, forbidden from learning Chinese or traveling inland. Chinese saw no reason to learn from inferior barbarians. This attitude was disastrous when faced with industrializing European powers. By early 19th century, Britain had industrialized, developing steam engines, factories, and modern weapons. British Empire was expanding globally, seeking markets and resources. China's self-imposed isolation and technological stagnation made it vulnerable. The Opium Wars, 1839 to 1842 and 1856 to 1860, were turning points. British merchants smuggled opium from India into China, creating addiction crisis and draining silver from Chinese economy. Chinese government tried to suppress opium trade, destroying stockpiles and arresting dealers. Britain responded with military force, using steam-powered gunboats and modern artillery to defeat Chinese forces easily. The Treaty of Nanjing, 1842, forced China to cede Hong Kong, open 5 treaty ports to British trade, pay indemnity, and grant extraterritoriality, meaning British citizens in China were subject only to British law, not Chinese law. This was humiliation, violation of Chinese sovereignty, and beginning of century of humiliation, when China was carved into spheres of influence by foreign powers. The Second Opium War resulted in more concessions, more ports opened, foreign embassies in Beijing, and legalization of opium trade. China was forced into unequal treaties with Britain, France, Russia, Germany, Japan, and United States, each demanding privileges and territory. Qing dynasty couldn't refuse, because its military was obsolete, its government was corrupt, and its people were impoverished. Internal rebellions compounded external pressures. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, was devastating civil war. Hong Xiuquan, failed examination candidate, claimed to be Jesus Christ's younger brother, leading millenarian uprising to establish heavenly kingdom. The Taiping captured southern China, including Nanjing, which they made capital. The Qing, with help from foreign powers and Chinese generals like Zheng Guofan, who organized regional armies, eventually suppressed rebellion, but 30 million people died, making it one of deadliest conflicts in history. Other rebellions followed: Mian Rebellion, Muslim rebellions in Yunnan and Northwest, all reflecting deep discontent with Qing rule, population pressure, and economic hardship. Qing dynasty survived but was weakened, dependent on regional armies rather than central military, and increasingly reliant on foreign loans and support. Reform attempts came late and were insufficient. The self-strengthening movement, 1861 to 1895, tried to adopt Western military technology while preserving Confucian values: Chinese learning for essential principles, Western learning for practical use. Arsenals, shipyards, and military academies were established. Young Chinese were sent abroad to study, but reforms were superficial, not addressing fundamental problems: corrupt bureaucracy, conservative ideology, and lack of industrial base. The First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, exposed self-strengthening movement's failure. Japan, which had modernized rapidly after Meiji Restoration in 1868, defeated China decisively. Japanese forces destroyed Chinese fleet, occupied Korea and Taiwan, and threatened Beijing. The Treaty of Shimonoseki forced China to recognize Korean independence, ending Chinese suzerainty, cede Taiwan, Liaodong Peninsula, and Pescadores Islands to Japan, pay massive indemnity, and grant Japan most favored nation status. This defeat by Japan, East Asian neighbor China, had historically looked down upon, was profound shock. It proved that adopting Western technology without fundamental social and political reform was insufficient. Japan had modernized comprehensively, reforming government, education, military, and economy, while China had tinkered at margins while preserving Confucian system. Radical reformers like Kang Yue and Liang Qichao advocated constitutional monarchy and comprehensive reform. The Guangxu Emperor, sympathetic to reforms, issued 100 Days Reform in 1898, edicts modernizing education, military, and government. But conservative officials, led by Empress Dowager Cixi, feared reforms threatened their power and orchestrated coup, placing emperor under house arrest and reversing reforms. The Boxer Rebellion, 1899 to 1901, was anti-foreign uprising supported initially by Qing court, desperate attempt to expel foreigners and restore Chinese pride. The Boxers, secret society practicing martial arts and claiming magical protection from bullets, attacked foreign missionaries, Chinese Christians, and foreign diplomats in Beijing. Eight-nation alliance, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, United States, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, sent troops to relieve besieged embassies, defeated Boxers and Qing forces, occupied Beijing, and imposed Boxer Protocol, requiring China to pay enormous indemnity, allow foreign troops in Beijing, and execute officials who supported Boxers. This was ultimate humiliation. Qing dynasty was bankrupt financially and morally. Empress Dowager Cixi, who had opposed reform, now desperately attempted reforms in 1900s, abolishing civil service examinations in 1905, promising constitutional government, and sponsoring modern schools and military training. But it was too late. Revolutionary movements gained strength. Sun Yat-sen, Western-educated doctor, organized secret societies advocating overthrow of Qing and establishment of republic. His three principles of the people, nationalism, democracy, and livelihood, provided ideological foundation for revolution. Multiple uprisings failed, but support grew among military, students, and overseas Chinese. In October 1911, military mutiny in Wuchang sparked revolution, spreading across southern and central China. Province after province declared independence from Qing. The Qing court, desperate, recalled Yuan Shikai, general who had been forced into retirement, hoping he could suppress rebellion. But Yuan negotiated with revolutionaries, forcing Puji, 6-year-old last emperor, to abdicate in February 1912. The Qing dynasty ended, and Republic of China was established, ending over 2,000 years of imperial rule. But Republic was weak and unstable. Yuan Shikai became president, but attempted to restore monarchy with himself as emperor, causing revolt. After his death in 1916, China fragmented into warlord-controlled regions, beginning chaotic period lasting until communist victory in 1949. Throughout the 20th century, China struggled with modernization, sovereignty, and identity. The republic under nationalists fought warlords, Japanese invasion, and communist insurgency. The People's Republic under Mao Zedong attempted radical transformation through Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, causing tens of millions of deaths, but also establishing unified state. Reform era under Deng Xiaoping from 1978. Onward opened economy, lifting hundreds of millions from poverty while maintaining authoritarian political control. Today, China is rising power, world's second largest economy, challenging American hegemony and reclaiming what many Chinese see as rightful place as major civilization and great power. This century of humiliation is invoked as a reminder of past weakness and justification for assertive foreign policy and internal control. Chinese Communist Party presents itself as restoring Chinese greatness after fall of Qing and chaos of early 20th century. This narrative oversimplifies. China's current system is unprecedented, combining authoritarian politics, capitalist economics, and nationalist ideology. It's not restoration of imperial China, but something new, though using traditional symbols and rhetoric. The party claims legitimacy partly through success in modernizing China and erasing humiliation of Qing decline and warlord chaos. The Silk Road metaphor has been revived. China's Belt and Road Initiative, announced in 2013, explicitly invokes historical Silk Road while building modern infrastructure, ports, railways, and roads connecting China to Central Asia, Middle East, Africa, and Europe. Whether this recreates Silk Road's mutually beneficial exchange or creates debt dependency and neo-colonialism is debated, but the reference to Silk Road shows how China uses historical legacy to legitimize contemporary ambitions. As you drift toward sleep tonight, consider China's remarkable trajectory. Millennia as world's most advanced civilization, pioneer of technologies that shaped global history, creator of philosophical and cultural traditions influencing billions, then catastrophic decline when confronted by industrialized West, century of humiliation and chaos, and now resurgence as major power challenging Western dominance. This isn't simple story of continuous greatness interrupted by brief setback. It's complex story of civilization that succeeded so well within its paradigm that it couldn't adapt when paradigm shifted. Confucian ideology that enabled stable governance for centuries became obstacle when rapid change was needed. Technological capacity that produced paper, printing, gunpowder, and compass couldn't prevent stagnation when innovation was restricted by conservative examination system and anti-commercial values. China's decline wasn't inevitable. Different choices, more openness to foreign ideas, earlier reforms, less ideological rigidity might have enabled China to modernize on its terms, as Japan did. But conservatism, bureaucratic inertia, and conviction of cultural superiority prevented necessary changes until too late. Yet China's resilience is remarkable. Despite century of humiliation, China maintained cultural identity, eventually modernized, and is now reclaiming global prominence. Chinese language, with more speakers than any other, continues evolving. Chinese philosophy, particularly Confucianism, influences Asian societies and increasingly attracts Western interest. Chinese art, calligraphy, painting, and ceramics remain vibrant traditions. Chinese diaspora, tens of millions strong, maintains connections to ancestral culture while adapting to new homes. The Silk Road's legacy persists in a globalized world where goods, ideas, and people move more freely than ever, creating cultural hybridity, an exchange that ancient merchants would recognize even if scale and speed are unprecedented. Technologies invented in ancient China, paper, printing, gunpowder, compass, fundamentally shaped modernity. Philosophical traditions developed by Confucius, Laozi, and Buddhist teachers continue offering insights into ethics, governance, and human nature. China's contribution to human civilization is immense. For much of recorded history, China was most populous, most advanced, and most influential civilization. Decline during 19th to 20th centuries was aberration, tragic, but temporary departure from historical norm of Chinese centrality. Whether 21st century sees Chinese resurgence to superpower status or something else remains uncertain. but China's impact on past and influence on future are undeniable. Tonight, sleep peacefully, knowing that great civilizations rise, sometimes fall, and sometimes rise again. That technological advancement doesn't guarantee political success. That cultural achievements outlast political regimes. That the Silk Road, physical and metaphorical, continues connecting peoples and ideas across Eurasia and beyond. That China, for all its problems and controversial policies, is heir to 3,000 years of continuous civilization. Remarkable achievement in a world where most ancient civilizations are archaeological curiosities rather than living cultures. Rest well, and let the Silk Road carry you into dreams, where caravans still cross deserts, merchants haggle in Samarkand's bazaars, and silk flows westward, while ideas flow eastward, creating exchange that enriched all participants and laid foundations for interconnected world we inhabit today. Let the Great Wall stand again in imagination, not as barrier, but as symbol of human capacity for monumental construction. Let Tang Dynasty poetry sing of moon and wine and friendship. Let Song Dynasty paintings show misty mountains and infinite space. Let Confucian wisdom guide proper conduct. Let Taoist naturalness bring peace. Let Buddhist compassion embrace all beings. Ancient China is gone, its emperors dust, its dynasties extinct, its empires dissolved, but its legacy lives on in every piece of paper, every printed page, every firecracker and compass, every philosophical insight and artistic achievement, every technological innovation and administrative system that traces ancestry, however distant, to Middle Kingdom, that for millennia stood as beacon of civilization, learning, and culture at eastern end of Great Silk Road, connecting world. The story is told. The empire has fallen and risen again in new form. The long history continues, connecting past to present to unknown future. China's journey is humanity's journey. Our capacity for creation and destruction, wisdom and folly, resilience and rigidity, glory and decline, all manifest in civilization that gave world so much and endured so much and continues seeking its place in rapidly changing world, where ancient verities confront modern challenges and no one knows how story ends. Sleep deeply now, secure in knowledge that history teaches humility about our own certainties, respect for different cultures' achievements, and awareness that rise and fall are eternal rhythms affecting all civilizations, including our own. Let ancient China's lessons guide you into restful sleep. Value education and cultivation. Maintain harmony with nature and society. Honor ancestors and traditions. Adapt when necessary. And remember that civilizations are human creations, remarkable but impermanent, leaving legacies that outlast their political power and continue shaping world long after their final emperors have passed into history, where all things mortal eventually go. Good night. Rest in peace. Dream of silk roads and great walls, of poetry and philosophy, of emperors and peasants, of rise and fall and rise again. The story continues, but tonight you can rest. Tomorrow brings new challenges and opportunities, but tonight, ancient China's long history carries you gently into sleep, where time dissolves and all civilizations, past and present and future, exist simultaneously in eternal now, where humans striving for meaning, order, beauty, and legacy finds expression in forms as diverse as humanity itself. Sleep well. The Middle Kingdom abides, in memory and influence, if not in emperors and empires, and that, perhaps, is the truest immortality any civilization can achieve. Not eternal political power, but enduring cultural impact that shapes descendants and strangers alike, connecting us across centuries to people who lived and dreamed and created and suffered and left us inheritance we barely recognize, but couldn't live without. Good night. May your dreams be as vast as China's history, as profound as its philosophy, as beautiful as its art, and as peaceful as the sleep its ancient stories are designed to bring. Rest now. The journey ends. The lessons remain. The legacy endures. Sleep deeply, and wake refreshed to face your own time, with wisdom. Ancient China can still teach if we're humble enough to listen and open enough to learn. Good night, and farewell to ancient China, civilization of civilizations, teacher of teachers, keeper of traditions, creator of innovations, and eternal reminder that human history is rich, complex, tragic, triumphant, and endlessly fascinating tapestry connecting all of us across time and space in shared human story that continues unfolding day by day, generation by generation, civilization by civilization, forever and always, until history itself ends and something beyond history begins. Sleep peacefully, dream deeply, rest well, good night.